Week 4 of Health, Society and Research was based on focusing on the cultural identity of Indigenous Australians. This week acted as a medium for myself to re-evaluate my current understanding of Indigenous health and to integrate it with the values held dear to Indigenous Australians. The readings prescribed this week all had a common theme surrounding the appropriate use of terminology and language in regards to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This exercise was an eye-opening experience as I learned how language that I have commonly encountered in my day-to-day life can often have inadvertent yet offensive connotations despite our best efforts to remain respectful. This emphasizes how difficult it must be for the Indigenous population, who must constantly face this unjust language that has been normalized since colonization. Furthermore, Wayne Williams, in his lecture this week, educated us on the many roots of historical injustices from the perspective of an Indigenous Australian. What I found most harrowing about his lecture was the lack and ineffectiveness of current notions to reconcile with the intergenerational trauma experienced by Indigenous Australians, such as with the stolen generations. This emphasized the need for further advocacy surrounding Indigenous health, and I am grateful for the practices of HSR, which have made me aware of my limited knowledge surrounding Indigenous health and further expose how more needs to be done in the education system of Australia. This conversation is furthered in the tutorial on the foundational knowledge of the Indigenous identity. Specifically, the intergenerational trauma video and the whole group yarning activity both allowed us to discuss practices in healthcare which could help us in the process of healing some of the intergenerational trauma experienced. One practice, which was particularly fascinating, was the bringing of soil from the land native to a pregnant Indigenous woman to the hospital so the infant could be born on the same nation. This practice, which helped build a sense of Indigenous identity for the child, demonstrated how instrumental health practitioners can be towards efforts to reconciliation. Through this week, it has been made clear that as an aspiring health practitioner, more must be done to not only improve the overall health outcomes of the Indigenous community, but to also further break down the barriers to reconciliation and work to ensure that Australia commits to restoring and healing the sense of Indigenous identity. For my research question this week, I think it would be most appropriate to ask a simple survey question about what health means to Indigenous people so that we can further establish the understanding of Indigenous health and work towards advocating and formulating practices specifically to cater to Indigenous health as a whole.